Seated debate, yeah, so I just took it over. Do you want it?
Oh, yeah, but you take it over, yeah. Is that yours or mine?
That's me.
Okay, perfect. All right. So this is going to be somewhat interactive. We'll go through that in just a second. So get out your phones to begin with. Okay. So for decades, the randomized clinical trial has been the undisputed heavyweight champion of medical evidence in radiation oncology. It is the gold standard. It is how we know what works, what is safe, and what saves lives. But the gold standard is heavy, and it's also incredibly slow. We are looking at a system where a single trial can run for 7 to 10 years and cost millions and millions of dollars to run. Now enter artificial intelligence. With the explosion of electronic and digital health records, vast imaging databases, and advanced machine learning techniques, our medical community is faced with a provocative question. Are we still bound to the slow machinery of the past? If an algorithm can analyze millions of patient outcomes in a fraction of the time, can it extract the same regulatory and clinical grade evidence without the need for randomization? Are we looking at a future where AI doesn't just augment the clinical trial, but entirely replaces it? That sounds like the making of a debate. So today we're going to explore the space between the promise of the technology and the rigors and reality of patient care. It's a profound question that we'll face about the future of medicine and scientific evidence. So we're going to argue it out. Yes or no to the statement, AI will replace the way we do clinical trials. So before we meet our debaters, let's talk about how we determine the winner of this debate. In our format, the victor goes to the team that changes the most minds. So that's important. I'm going to ask you to vote twice. Vote once right now by texting that message. And you'll either vote for, against, or undecided. Or I guess neutral. For, against, or neutral.
You only have to text A, B, or C.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once you're done with this, at the end, we'll repeat this process, and the person that changes the most sides will be the winner. Okay. So go ahead and cast your votes now. Let's meet the people who are trying to convince you. We have arguing for the motion that AI will replace the way we do clinical trials. We have Jeff Nelson. Jeff, tell me about your first interaction with AI.
It's hard to say given, I guess it depends on which aspect or which part of AI we're talking about, but I will say that I've had a general, at least interest in AI and just automation stuff in general for a very long time, even if not necessarily a lot of expertise.
Arguing against the motion that AI will not replace the way we do clinical trials, Vic, who needs no introduction. So Vic, do you use AI in your regular life?
I do use AI quite a bit, so it's saved me a lot of time writing recommendation letters recently.
Good. Format of the debate, each one will have 5 minutes to make their case. From there, we'll do 20 minutes of questions and rebuttals, where we'll take questions from the audience and the moderator, and then they'll have a short 3 to 4 minute closing argument. Hopefully swayed you to their side. All right. So let's go first with Vic. You want to start off? Or I guess, Jeff, let's have you start off. Let me pull up your slides here. Can I reshare? Did everyone do this?
Yeah, go for it. I'm deactivating it. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
So you should
Put it back on.
It's a reasonable neutral poll.
Sorry.
I'll just acknowledge I sent my slides to him this morning, and texted him to alert him to that fact like 20 minutes ago. Kind of on me.
And I sent slides when I realized Jeff had slides. Using AI.
I hope this format goes well. Give us feedback afterwards, because if this goes well, I'd like to have another one. Jeff, there are your slides.
All right. Should I advance or?
Sure, it's up to you.
All right, yeah. I'll
right.
come up here and do it, sure.
5 minutes is starting now.
All right, so the premise, right? AI will replace the way we do clinical trials. I apologize for getting like pedantic on this, but I do think that like what we mean when we say these words has an impact on whether or not you subscribe to it. So just artificial intelligence in general, it's these different programming systems that are performing tasks that typically would require humans to do them. And the capacity to which software can do this has obviously been rapidly advancing and shows no sign of slowing in its continued advance of what it's actually capable of. Replace, this was actually a bizarre sidetrack I discovered in doing this, that the word replace actually only changed to what we think about now, like halfway through its existence in the English language, of taking the place of something. And then this is really where I feel like the crux of the debate really comes down to, is what do we mean when we say the way we do? If we mean when we say the way we do clinical trials, the fundamentals underpinning them, like statistics or things of that nature, then I think we could just end it now and we could say, no, it's not going to get rid of the fundamentals, right? But if we mean all the steps and who's doing said steps, and that process itself being the way we do clinical trials, then I would say, yes, the AI will end up replacing how we do a number of those. I'll also note it's an open-ended time frame. There's no expiration date on the statement, right? So if we're thinking many years into the future on this, it gets really difficult to predict, right? There's a lot of uncertainties on how we make predictions going into the future, and it can be influenced by tiny little things, like the fact that answering machines weren't really widely used till after 2001: A Space Odyssey was made, and then he leaves the message with his toddler as opposed to leaving a message for his wife that she'll actually be able to get and hear. The other thought that came to mind is, like, imagine like in the mid 20th century explaining to someone that the calculating machines that were being worked on by IBM were going to end up fully replacing all of like the music recording, distribution, and playback industry that exists, right? It's like advances in small areas can have unforeseen impacts, and usually in advantageous ways in other areas of development and other fields. So to just like grab a few of the things, right? Normally with our clinical trials for RAD-ONC, we have these very long documents where the attempt is to try to minimize unnecessary variation within the trial. And a number of those things involve many pages of exactly how you draw the contours, many pages of like what the goals are within the trial, and a lot of pages on who is eligible for said trial. I mean, it's worth noting now, like there are already new trials where the contours are being drawn and defined by AI algorithms. Just jumping also to the specifics on patient eligibility, like within just the last year, there are now clinical studies that are leveraging AI for looking through EMR to identify eligible patients for the study itself. This is one in particular that came to mind. And in the context of this process of enrolling patients, I mean, this is a big aspect to the difficulty in a lot of our clinical trial process, right? Historically, less than 10% of adult patients are enrolled because it's just a pain to try to make sure that we're getting the right eligibility and the right person. I would argue that AI tools in this area are very likely going to help increase participation in trials and potentially make it easier for us to do these trials with rarer cases. from a paper that was kind of going over an overview of AI within our field. This is just in the treatment planning process itself, and all of these different steps, right, throughout the process of coming up with the radiation plans and the ways in which already we have AI assisted stuff in place, and likely future applications where things are coming more and more online are there. And I think the more interesting one is as we increase the pool of data that we are funneling into these AI models, as we see with this slide, right? Genomics, all the radiomics, quantitative information we can extract from the imaging itself, feeding all of those things into the model. I think it's going to allow us to, in the clinical trials, look at maybe additional factors for prediction and outcomes and being able to just process this. So I think I'm out of my 5 minutes, but I would argue that not just that AI will, but I would say that maybe a more accurate is like AI is replacing the way that we conduct clinical trials.
Thank you.
I'll just talk from here. Olivia. All right, so that's kind of embarrassing. I actually agree with Jeff.
I assumed we would.
AI is replacing. But I have a problem with this in that I think AI is replacing the way we're doing clinical trials, but we should not let it. And here's where I'm coming from. What are we trying to do? And caveat, when I'm thinking of AI, I'm talking about LLMs. I think that's what most people think of as AI these days. So what's an LLM? What is it doing? It's looking at large sets of data, trying to find patterns, trying to find correlations, right? What are we doing in a clinical trial? We have a very controlled environment where we are trying to find causation. Now, causation and correlation are not the same, right? So do you trust a model, whatever the model is, to look at very sparse data? Again, we're looking at, now there are some clinical trials with enrollments of hundreds. There are some clinical trials where it takes 3 or 4 years to get 15 people on it to meet the bare minimum power of a clinical trial. If you have 15 data sets, would you trust the model to go through it and say, yep, there's causation there? I wouldn't. Not on an LLM that can barely do math. Now, I know Andrew mentioned recently there was in the news one of Erdős's conjectures was denied, or AI supposedly, according to OpenAI, I'm saying according to OpenAI, call me jaded, but I don't trust big tech. They said that it's a general model that found this proof. And I'll give them some credit. For 80 years, nobody has found it. A proof was found. It was verified. So, okay. But personal example, my brother-in-law asked ChatGPT to convert some hex or some binary into hex. It did 2 right, it got the 3rd wrong, and it did number 4 and 5 right. Binary to hex, we've all done that in Computer Science 101. Yet the LLM couldn't do it. Now, am I going to trust it to find for me whether something is caused by some very sparse data? I submit it, you can't. And you should not. It will give you an answer. I don't know that you should trust it. It should still be verified. And then maybe things get faster, yes. But you still need that human in the loop. I think the bigger problem is AI sycophancy. It tries to give you an answer that makes you happy. So let's say finding a clinical trial that matches your condition. It will say, oh yeah, this trial being run by Ryan solves this. Then Ryan will look at it and say, no, it doesn't. So again, you should trust but verify. You can use AI for sure to move things along. You can use AI to write the protocol, but look at your references. Make sure that it didn't hallucinate and put something in there, because it's hard already to get patients, right? And then now if a patient says, hey, this says colloidal silver cures cancer, and it's not actually proven, then I have a problem. You'll get less patients. The other problem I have is the ethics of it all. Who is responsible? If AI makes a mistake and we actually hurt a patient down the road, who's responsible? In a case run by humans, you know exactly who's responsible. There's also the sycophancy leads me to another problem that I'm seeing. Clinical trials are run so that you make changes as soon as you see something that went wrong. Is AI going to really do that? It's trying to be sycophant, right? It's trying to say, hey, all is good. So those are the reasons I think we should be very careful and not let AI replace the way we're doing things. But for sure, it can be used.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move to the question, answer, and rebuttal stage. So arguing for the motion, Jeff is saying that there's many years in the future to give AI time to work. It's already in use now. He's arguing that we're already contouring with it. It's already being used in the clinic, and that we still have lots more data coming in. And Vic, on the other side, makes the arguments that causation and correlation and causality are big problems with AI, that there's smaller data sets, that we should use it, but not replace it. He also makes the arguments that there's serious ethical concerns about that. So let's take the last one on ethics. So ethical concerns. How do you deal with informed consent for patients when AI is making the decisions for the patient as to what treatment to go with? So how would you respond to that, Jeff?
Sure. I mean, I think ultimately we can very much leave the decision to the patients, right? I mean, I view AI as, especially on that front, as a tool for doing the hard work of sifting through the large amounts of data to see who actually is or is not eligible. And then at least we then have the short list of eligible patients that the patients then, they still have the option of whether or not they're actually going to participate in a trial, right? So it's not necessarily removing it. As far as the question about general ethics, I mean, I agree with Vic that those ethical questions are really crucial, important questions that we need to be looking at. And I feel like at least one of my takeaways from not just this discussion, but really the entirety of the meeting and any discussions we've had about AI here today is that ideally we as medical physicists, we really do have a nice toolkit that we regularly utilize as part of our jobs of doing quality assurance work, doing testing, looking at the system, identifying ways things could go wrong, putting tests in place to verify. And I think that increasingly we will likely need to be using those tools specifically when evaluating AI systems as we build them and implement them into clinical use.
Vic, do you want to respond?
Well, I agree with Jeff. I think the patient should still have information on what is being tested, what the information is being used. But my main problem, and that goes back to big tech, right? So would you trust big tech with this very, very valuable data set that you have on that's very sparse and takes you years to gather to make a final decision? And how are they going to use it? Are they going to use that data that's personal to retrain the system? I mean, Google tells you it doesn't listen to your phone, right? I have an Android. But my wife told me one time that we needed to get a new fridge, and guess what I see the next day on my phone? Fridge ads all of a sudden. So do you trust those companies to then ethically use this data? I submit no, not right now. maybe things would change.
That's kind of the question of sparse data. You brought up that there's small data sets involved, and I want to talk about that a little bit. How do you guys think AI will handle issues where there's new technology, like Flash or some new form of treatment where there's not a whole lot of historical data? Do you see that a future using AI for those type of things when the data sets get really small? Either one of you guys, feel free to.
I think that AI will regularly struggle with limited data, just like almost any system, right? Where if we don't have enough data, we're going to run into issues. And I know that Vic's focus has been on a lot of like the large language models, and in particular, those kind of implemented and run by larger tech firms. I'll just add, like, there are a variety of AI applications that aren't necessarily a large language model approach. And even those that are, like, you can develop your own, like train your own large language models. And at this point, there are some that you can do just on a local machine, let alone larger stuff. So I do think that like HIPAA and other things are going to be crucial. We're going to have to make sure that the AI systems that we're implementing are meeting, sort of these guidelines that we already work with and operate with within the clinic that may get around or mitigate a lot of the concerns that you bring up that are all legitimate concerns if we are just talking about, essentially like ChatGPT or Claude, right, or some of these more commercial, larger name AI systems that are generally being discussed right now in the news.
So I agree with Jeff. The general person on the road today, if I go and ask them about AI, they're thinking ChatGPT, they're thinking LLM. But AI has existed for years, right? So we've had very simple machine learning models that we could use, for example. But even those are not as data hungry as a deep learning model, but they're still data hungry. So if you have 20 data points, it'll either overfit or it'll underfit, or something will happen where the predictions are not necessarily trustworthy in the end, because in order to train it, you take some of that data, it's already seen it, and then you can't feed the same thing over, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one of the problems. I definitely think that we should have not big tech taking advantage of this. So if it should be the FDA or some other the NIH that holds a model in a closed system so that that data is being protected for sure. But even then, I don't think you can train a model on very sparse data. Now, the other side of the story would be, well, let the AI augment the data, but you've all seen the data, the AI slop that's available, right? If you have little kids, just look on YouTube and it's just full of nonsense. Now, if you have AI training on data slop, what do you think will happen? Even more slop, sloppier slop.
So Vic raised the point that AI has been around for a while. What do you guys think is holding back AI currently? What's the bottleneck from keeping, a major trial being fully done with just AI curated data? Machine learning has been around for a while. Does it hurt or help your argument that there's been no? I don't think there's been a NCCN level 1 evidence that has been done without being collaborated by a clinical trial. What's the bottleneck? I guess is the crux of the question.
I think it's likely sort of somewhat multifaceted. My feeling right now is that on a lot of continuing AI research, part of the difficulty and danger is one that is somewhat one of human psychology, which is actually something I was thinking about in the presentation on the report for removing the shielding guidelines, where maybe something that wasn't fully factored in is human psychology and behavior and how things get discussed and dealt with. And public opinion is nothing to be dismissive of in any way. And Once something gets settled into falling into the realm of politics and it becomes a notable enough matter that people identify what their tribe's orientation is to the topic of AI, and it's swept into AI, it can be difficult to have any information have a drastic impact on the public perception because you can give it facts, and if people's identified tribe are against it, then it's very difficult to convince them to not be against it. And so hopefully a good, healthy understanding of how best to share and educate on these topics can get some nice mixture with also understanding how people perceive and hear these things. And hopefully we can get enough consortium from people across the spectrum that it doesn't go the route of climate change studies where when you look at the researchers and what the agreement rates are on things versus what the public perception is, it's difficult to get that work across. And so I feel like that's right now probably one of the larger bottlenecks for AI research.
Let's take a question from the audience. Anyone have questions for him? In the back.
I guess my question would be, so Vic is arguing that, AI can't, like, theoretically couldn't make a good decision because of sycophancy and small data sets. But why does the question about whether AI is going to replace the way that we do clinical trials require that AI is making the final decision?
So I agree with you, it doesn't. And I think, so AI is true. AI is here. We live in a world that has AI, but I think it's a tool that we should not let run away from us. If you listen to what Sam Altman or Elon Musk have to say, they're saying, look, the world of WALL-E, I'm assuming you've seen WALL-E, the cartoon, where we all get fat and we go on Axiom and robots run the world. According to them, the world is here. That's the current world. And I think that if you allow that to run away from you and you then say, well, there's tons of data already, why don't I let a model look at it and try to figure out the question, identify the patients, and then make a decision on it, and then come up with a causal response, I think it can be very wrong. So will AI help? Of course it does. I just said, now writing a letter of recommendation takes me 30 minutes as opposed to 3 hours. But even though I use the same CV I would have used myself, I still type some notes and then say, hey, write me a good letter of recommendation. And then I still go through it. So AI in the end, to me, should be used as a tool, not as the final say. So if all you're telling me is AI will help identify which clinical trial this patient is best suited for, and then a biostatistician or a clinician will look at the actual eligibility, a biostatistician will look at the data and tease out differences in patients, et cetera, and then a group, the PI and his or her helpers will make the final decision, then yes, I am for that. But I'm afraid that I'm not 100% sure this will make it faster, because maybe now they'll have more slop to digest and take the real data out of. That's
and I feel like that it's a super legitimate concern, and I think like we've seen it play out in some ways. I remember in the earliest days of like just atlas-based attempts at auto segmentation that very few, if any, tried to actually fully implement, because the reality was that it had enough shortcomings that you'd spend as much more time fixing the contours it generated as you would actually save. Like it was not really any net savings. Whereas like these days, we've continued to iterate on the model development and it is currently saving a good amount of time on them. But how it gets trained and how we put these quality control checks in place, I think are the exact types of things that we're going to need to actively weigh in on and participate in terms of putting these checks in place. I also even just was thinking, as you were describing that, of a number of these larger tech firms' attempts at developing some of these things. You know, if you think back to like 15 years ago, it seems like every 6 months or so, there'd be a new news story of like Microsoft or some other company working on generating like a sort of AI-based chatbot that would very quickly go awry because it was getting trained on like internet comments. And so it would skew into like, you know, Nazi ideology and stuff super fast. And they had to just pull the bots down because they needed to fine tune the training. And even now, like you mentioned with how they're always very agreeable. And that was just part of the human psychology, I guess, that they learned over time. Like, let's make them more like this, which for me just ends up getting more aggravating when I interact with them because you're like, stop trying to.
Do you think that, so if the data is noisy and you need to kind of get harmonious data for the AI to be able to process, at what point does that really just sound like a prospective protocol? And if that's the case, then is AI actually ever going to replace a randomized clinical trial? So the question is, you know, data, contours, even toxicity across hospitals, they vary so much that if AI pulls in this data, does it average out the noise? Does it make it worse? When you talk about large institutions versus community practices, does that data that gets incorporated into AI become worse when it gets aggregated? And then if you have to go through the process of making that data harmonious, at what point are you basically just doing a trial?
It's a good question, and I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer. I mean, so much of it, the devil's in the details of when you're building the model, like you said, like if it's garbage in, garbage out, when you're training it, you want to train it on information that you have that you know is reliable. And I mean, I think at least the current sort of standard practice is like maybe train the model on 80% of the data you have, with the other 20% reserved as test cases on verifying that you aren't overfitting data. I think it's basically as we continue to develop additional AI models that are tuned for specific purposes like this, that there is a good amount of like quality checks that we need to have in place to ensure it.
Did you get a question?
Yeah, so maybe an observation, but I'd like you to sort of give your opinion on it. Within the AI virtual clinical trial, digital twin sort of mindset, there is this idea of real world evidence, right? So these things are founded in some sort of real world evidence. And what I get a sense of is that Jeff, you and Vic have a different definition of what would be acceptable real world evidence. For you, if it's going to be modeling, it might be the proteomics, the genomics, the image radiomics, all these things, all these data points. And as we get better at, modeling protein chemistry and RNA chemistry and stuff, we'll get to the point where the real world evidence is things like, oh, you have this gene, you have that, you have this, whereas Vic, it feels to me like the real world evidence you want is at least some clinical feedback, at least a small number of patients going through and us having certainty that the model is correct. So did I encapsulate that right? Do you feel like it's based upon the real world evidence, or is there something else here?
I think that ideally, I think it ought to be based on real world evidence. That being said, like you brought up with the digital twins information, right, where you're still feeding multiple iterations of sort of stuff that, at very least for the application that it's utilizing the data for, it is sufficiently reliable information. I feel like maybe I'm rambling, not directly addressing what you brought up, but yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna hand off to Vic, and maybe I'll come back to that.
I guess to me, a clinical trial, you have very controlled environments. And in fact, I'll take a step back to the question that you asked before. So let's say we know that you give the same physician the same CT to contour twice, you'll get two sets of contours, right? They may overlap to a certain extent, but they won't be perfectly overlap. So in a way, maybe AI can help because there's some even if it contours, if it calls the bladder the prostate or the prostate the bladder, it'll call every prostate bladder, right? So the data that you get in the end is uniform, and then you can try to make sense out of it. So my problem is that if we already have the data, then why are we running the trial? And if we don't have the data, if the point of the trial is to say, this is my question, it's never been investigated before, then how is the model going to make sense of it? Because it doesn't have anything that it got trained on. So that's where, to come back to your point, a human has to be involved eventually. So and again, I think if you listen to Altman, he will say, no, you don't need to do it. ChatGPT 50.2 will do it for you. But and it's crazy to me. He's already started this. I read an article the other day, and I'm just diverging a bit, but there's now ChatGPT Finance, and people are giving him the data, their financial data. That's, to me, that's nonsense. But people have believed enough. And to go back to Jeff's psychology thing is, why have we not had an AI model so far? I think it's because to the general public, AI has always been, oh, you need programming. This is a computer scientist's realm. We're not going to go into it. Now, because of those LLMs and everybody's using them, people are thinking, oh, okay, well, the Jetsons are here now. So we can do this. All of our problems are now solved. But I feel that this push, and then you go into ChatGPT and you say, can you show slide number 1 of that PowerPoint presentation? So this is an example. A colleague of mine wanted to come up with some HDR education material. And so he told Copilot, hey, give me a sagittal image of a patient and show how you would put the applicator in and then the patient will be CT'd. Well, we've all thought that butt heads exist, but Copilot kind of shows you exactly what a butt head would look like. So, I mean, okay, radiation oncology, there's not much data, right? Fine. But surely there's a lot of data on what sagittal image should look like, on what a human body should look like. Could you go to the next slide, please? And then he asks, okay, well, show me some generic female anatomy. Well, then the rectum became the urethra. I'm not sure what that is. The vagina is in the middle of nowhere. So if you get stopped like that, would you even trust that in writing a protocol? I wouldn't. If I were a patient and I saw that, I'm like, I'm out. See ya. So I think this overselling is now backfiring. So now, you should go to the next slide. Sorry, Olivier. Andrew showed this earlier. So in 2015, Musk said, self-driving cars are here. Then Jeff Hinton said, radiologists, they're done. Well, reality, right? So overselling things, and that's why I think you've heard in the news at graduations, people are being booed as soon as they bring up AI. Because I think the younger generation are saying, wait, this is going to take my job away, but if I trust what ChatGPT is giving me, I see butt heads, and how do I trust? How is this going to make my life better? And my problem is now if we start saying, hey, you know this, you have a rare type of cancer, we want to study it, and we'll let AI do it, I feel people will say, no, I don't trust it.
Let's take another question from the audience. Luke.
Yeah, something I'm really stuck on is something you said at the beginning, Vic, about responsibility. I'm just trying to picture if I was in the clinic and I'm doing a prior dose assessment and I want to cite some source saying, hey, a patient previously got this dose, now they're getting this dose. There's a 5% chance of toxicity to whatever OAR. I would feel comfortable citing a study made by humans because I know that they are taking on responsibility in a way for their findings. But I don't think I would feel comfortable citing a purely AI-driven clinical study because I think the responsibility at that point would then shift on to me relying on that study to be accurate. I have a hard time picturing that I would do that. And I'm really curious if other people would feel comfortable using that as a citation.
I mean, if we're talking about currently available LLMs, I would hope that everyone's answer would be, no, I'm not just going to take what the LLM says because there's way too many digital hallucinations. And, I don't know that the LLM that we're using was ever even designed having in mind it being something to give medical advice explicitly, right? Which doesn't mean it's not getting used that way. But I like in my mind, I don't think that was at all in their intentions of what this model was intended for. And we have stuff like we have AI outside of just large language models, right, that we're utilizing. And so I think that's part of the difficulty in the debate and why I spent a little bit of time on sort of the definitions involved and what we mean when we say these words, because I feel like that's also at the heart of a lot of public disagreements over a wide array of issues and topics is we use the same words to mean wildly different things, which makes it impossible to actually have any useful discourse on the issue. If by AI we mean large language models that are like currently available on the market, then I think it's a very different discussion about AI and its role and whether or not it will have an increasing impact and role within the clinical trial process, as opposed to if we're talking about some current and largely future potential AI models, not even necessarily large language ones, though there will likely be large language ones used in trying to help to glean data from EMRs. But there are other varieties of models, and ideally they will be ones that are trained with a particular purpose in mind. And so it's sort of a very different thing, right? I mean, it's like complaining about Windows Paint when we're talking about something with like Excel, right? Like they're very different applications. They're both still software, but their purpose and like their intended use are wildly different, even though you could draw a spreadsheet in Microsoft Paint.
So let's say a hypothetical future, we're looking at 2040, AI has started replacing clinical trials and is collecting data. One thing you guys didn't speak about is cost. AI has a lot of infrastructure costs. Do you guys think that it will be cheaper or more expensive when AI is running clinical trials in that hypothetical situation, cost-wise, in terms of compared to like a phase 3 trial?
I mean, if we're basing it on how a lot of the technology currently exists throughout that whole process, right, including like what technology is being used for housing the AI stuff and doing the processing for this and what the cooling systems are designed like and all of these things, like I can't imagine based on our current technology and how things are implemented that it would end up being cost saving throwing all of the processing on it with current tech and current implementations. I think The difficulty, like I said, was just how do we even predict where things like what new developments are going to end up making some of these things more efficient, lessening some of like environmental impacts on these things if we actually devote time and effort toward developing tech on that side. Yeah, I think it's a hard one to answer.
You got a question, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't know if Vic wants to respond to that
Yeah,
before I
sorry.
go.
Yeah, cost, what do you think, Vic?
So I may disagree with Jeff on this one and say that I.
You guys are arguing each other's side.
Besides, so I think some of the cost, some of the infrastructure cost is already there. I don't think so, especially if I think we've debated already that LLMs may not be, or these super large models may not be the way to go. I'll share a secret. I happen to be married to an AI expert, and I've learned what I know about AI from her. And most of her work is telling people that you don't need. Okay, could you go to the last slide? I've wanted to do this slide for the longest time, but you have a nail, right? Do you use this Acme machine thing to hammer it, or do you just use a simple hammer? All of us will say, well, use the simple hammer, but using an LLM to solve a problem is akin to using this big Acme machine, right? So basically what she spends her day talking to businesses, she has her own business trying to help other businesses implement AI. She's telling them that, look, you need a simpler model. You need something that is local to you. So you're not just giving out all this data that you have. And you'd be surprised at some of the things that she finds. So I think that infrastructure and simpler models, simple machine learning models would easily run on anybody's laptop. It can be trained. Yeah, it can take 3 days to train. Who cares? Training an LLM on like ChatGPT takes years. That's where the big infrastructure cost is. But the infrastructure is there. All you have to do is go on Amazon AWS and say, I want this beefy server, and tokens are not all that expensive if you're using them correctly. So I think your cost problem compared to what we are paid, to what CTO officers are paid, compared to what physicians and PIs and what you have to pay the patients and when you're running 50,000 tests on them, I think those costs are going to go way up. But to me, it's more, how do you get the data? I think I agree with Andrew. If the idea is, let's build this human proteomics and genomics model that will go through and say, hey, we've identified 5 variants of this gene, and this is how they're working, and these are the proteins that they're creating. And once we get to that point, then I think we don't need clinical trials anymore. We just take a blood sample, we say, hey, what proteins do you have? And these are the problems you have. And here, potentially here's the meds, or at least diagnosis. This is what we have. But we're not there.
Okay, that will end the question and answer session. So if you guys want to, Vic, you go first, a short summary of your points before we close out the debate.
So thank you. And thank you for organizing this debate. I think this is very important. We've touched on the fact that we are one of 2 non-MD groups that are board certified. And I think we are the technology wielders, right? We understand this technology, and AI is here. We need to understand what's happening in the background, and we need to limit how much we allow to happen. I think Jeff touched very, very briefly on contours. When we started auto contouring, it was a waste of time. Now it's great. Now you barely go and touch up anything. So I think AI is a tool that we need to learn how to use properly, and we should limit how it's used. However, in clinical trials, I don't see it going anywhere for multiple reasons. The primary one is I don't think the technology is here right now. Now, if I go with Jeff's argument that we're talking about AI taking over in 2352, sure, maybe. But then maybe we'll have the model that Andrew was talking about. And at that point, we don't need clinical trials anymore. And the other problem I have is the ethics and the patient trust. We are depending on those very few patients who have this very, very curated set of problems. And this is why it takes 3 years to recruit 15 patients, because it's very controlled. If now 3 out of those 15 don't agree to participate, then we've got a bigger problem. And I think we stop advancing science at the cost of ads, of people saying, here, buy our product.
All right, Jeff, you want to make your closing arguments?
Sure. As I kind of said at the very outset of it, I feel like a lot depends on what we mean when we say the way we do clinical trials, because I feel like AI is playing an increasing role, and I feel like there are a number of areas in which it can and will be providing time savings, perhaps increased amount of data because we're recruiting more people, some better standardization in the clinical trial process by leveraging AI for a variety of the steps. If we reach a point where AI is doing the entirety of the process, I think that's something that is so far in the distant future that there's so many uncertainties about it. I don't know how useful it is to even talk about necessarily now. What I think now is emerging is the fact that we need to be careful about, as AI is trained, what it's trained on, what quality assurance is in place for making sure that it is in fact doing what we want it to do. And I think also a good awareness of where and how AI is being implemented clinically will allow us in particular as physicists to be able to help weigh in on some of these things. There was already a great slide earlier in the presentation of how with the AI, influenced image reconstruction that was able to perform it faster, you lost some of the inherent image information in there, right, in the process. And so I think if we know what steps along the way AI is playing a role and what role it's playing, I think sort of quantifying and assessing that and laying it out will be crucial for us moving forward to make sure that if and I would argue when we get to the point that AI has changed many, if not all of the steps of the clinical trial process, that we can at least do so knowing that we have a good handle on the quality assurance behind it and knowing that it is in fact giving us useful information and not hallucinations or slop.
Great. Well, thank you. So we're going to vote now again. So text that number again. A, you agree with Jeff that you are for the motion that AI will replace our clinical trial infrastructure, or vote with B, with Vic, that you are against it and it will not replace our clinical infrastructure, or neutral if you see
Such a weird binary.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll get the next talk queued up and then we'll get our results.
Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.